Captivated by that smile. Captivated by that smile, you're all that I can see. Captivated by that smile, all my senses complete. Feeling like a kid again. I wanna catch you. I wanna go out and do all the things I was scared to before you. I wanna go out and do all the things I was scared to before you. Held me with your eyes. Captivated by that smile, I don't know who you are. Captivated but unsure, eyes I just cannot breathe. Come on closer, won't you, babe? I wanna catch you. I wanna go out and do all the things I was scared to before you. I wanna go out and do all the things I was scared to before you. Held me with your eyes.
Hi, everybody. My name is Casey. I'm a singer, bassist, and composer. So excited to be bringing people together to talk about composing, creativity, and music. And I'm welcoming my amazing guest, Raquel Rivera. She is a contemporary jazz vocalist and composer from Guaynabo, Puerto Rico. She has a dreamy tone and creates sonic landscapes that envelop you and take you on a journey. She attended the prestigious Berklee College of Music in Boston, and she's working towards the release of her debut full-length album, Blossom. The album comprises 10 original pieces of music with visual accompaniment and tells colorful stories rooted in love, loss, and the inevitability of change. And here's a fun fact about Raquel and I. I met her in 2012 at a songwriting workshop with Gretchen Parlato, Becca Stevens, and Rebecca Martin. And we've stayed in touch. And I'm so happy to welcome her today for this interview. Hi, Raquel. How are you?
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Of course.
Yeah, we were just chatting about how it's been such a long time, but so glad that you are hosting these workshops and doing all these interviews to just kind of keep the ball rolling during this time. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for joining me. So happy to see you, have you here. And, I get some behind the scenes musical snippets from Raquel because we're in a songwriting group. So we share little snippets of what's happening these days, which is so fun. Raquel, I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about what your composing process is like.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many different ways of approaching composition. Particularly when, like you and I, we've sort of formally studied that. And I think a lot of the way that I was taught to write was very sort of technical and methodical, where you sort of have, you're given a place to start and then you kind of just um, go from there and you already have a structure of where you're going. But for me personally, when I'm writing for myself and my own music, I actually approach most of my writing from a more improvisational standpoint. I think that when I started learning about jazz, which is obviously deeply rooted in improvisation, it allowed me so much more freedom to explore my ideas. So a lot of my process is just, starting off with a really small idea and sort of improvising through it, whether it be vocally or, working with software to just sort of create that initial seed. And then, kind of go with my intuition. So that's sort of where I begin. And from there, obviously, all of that compositional knowledge that we've studied and have in the background informs sort of the rest of the process.
Wow. I love what you're saying about using improvisation to springboard you, or really it sounds like it's part of the whole process for you, improvising your way through and finding kind of where you want to go. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously there's situations in which I go in the opposite direction and I have a very structured approach. But for me personally, in terms of creating a piece that really flows and feels, as you mentioned, more like a journey for the listener, I have just found it more effective and also just fun for myself to approach it from that sort of improvisational standpoint.
So I know in the beginning I was talking about your album. I'm wondering if you could. I know it's coming out soon. I don't know when, but I'm excited when it drops. Could you walk us through the process of one of those songs?
Yeah. So one of the sort of longest and most, how would I say, in-depth pieces that I feel like really has a lot of elements to it. Is called Productively Idle. And I initially wrote it as, I think, 3 different little short ideas that initially felt like a few different songs. And they were really just something that I improvised. Each piece was probably like a minute or 2 long, but they each kind of came from this original feeling of feeling like you just have space and you're not necessarily being productive with your space or your time, but you're still creating. So each of these ideas just came from that same sort of root, but they each kind of had a different tone to them. So the first part was sort of a fun, I would say, like sort of Brazilian inspired piece that had vocalises, which is essentially you're sort of improvising syllables to a melody, and just was very rhythmic and upbeat. And then the second piece was really mellow and had this moody piano figure, totally different energy. And then the end was sort of this really hopeful piece where the band really collaborated with the melody. So I had all these different ideas, and I just treated them like an improvisation on this one seed. But eventually in my head, they all just kind of came together as something that belongs as a unit. So I basically combined all these pieces to be one through composed piece, which for my non-musicians out there basically means that you're not sort of repeating sections, doing like verse, chorus, but instead each section sort of lives on its own and then sort of develops into a completely different motif or sort of piece of the song. So once I did that, then the final part was really to make it sound like one piece that was cohesive and didn't sound like really random parts. But I think that the lyrics did half the work there because they all kind of related to this idea of being somewhat productive, even if you feel like you're just kind of sitting on your butt and not really creating, which I think that a lot of us can sort of relate to. So I would say that was one of the more like in-depth pieces that really took kind of a long time. It definitely took, a few months for each piece. I'm a big proponent of like sitting on music, as not physically, but you come up with an idea, you write something that could be a song, and 4 months later, you might be processing it differently to a point where you're able to add more ideas or just do something that makes it feel more complete. I don't know if that's something that you like to do, but I think for this album, I think it's probably been like 4 years in the making, and a lot of like just sitting on the music and sort of letting it breathe. Difficult to explain.
Yeah, I want to ask you a little bit more about, the creation of the album and the process of that. But sort of going back to what you're saying about, first of all, the title Productively Idle, that's, see what you did there.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And it seems like you have these different pieces. I think what you're saying is you had separate little pieces that you had to figure out how to put everything together. But there was a through line of the lyrics that tied the ideas together. So how did you go about taking, you have the lyrical thing that is the through line, but then the music, how did you go about connecting that?
Great question. Well, it's really funny. I want to kind of give the context that I showed this piece to a few different people that I sort of respect, musicians that are also composers, and quite a few of them were like, this doesn't make sense. Like, this doesn't go together. This just feels like disjointed. And and I was like, I get you, but like in my heart, this just goes together. But to be honest, I think a lot of it had to do with honestly giving a role to my band, and allowing there to be more instrumental sections that in a way could sort of morph into the next part of the piece. And again, that does have to do a lot with giving room for improvisation. So I believe between the first piece, which is really upbeat and has a lot of vocals going on, and the second piece, which is a lot more broody and sort of features the band, I had this middle section, which was pre-written. So I had a motif, I had a concept of what I wanted the band to do, but at the same time, I'm not really in it in terms of a melody or really being a vocalist. Like, I'm doing some backgroundy things, but essentially I'm kind of handing it over to the band with a structure that kind of compositionally leads to the next section, but I'm still sort of giving them the ability to take their time and like sit in that section so that they can sort of set the tone for the next part. So that was sort of the first interlude part. And then for the second, connecting the second and third pieces, I actually didn't really do much. I kind of decided to just have like a really abrupt change, which might seem strange, but it just kind of felt, I don't know, it didn't feel too jarring between the second and the third pieces. So I kind of just let it be. But yeah, I think especially like as singers, sometimes I feel like we feel obligated to just always be there and always be front and center and always have some melodic concept that we're featuring or always have lyrics. But I think part of what I like about this album is that I gave myself freedom to give the band freedom and have parts that are more instrumental, and that really kind of sit with what's musically there, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm hearing you talk about first of all, the musicians that you work with and how you work with them and the different sections. It seems like maybe that one moment is the burst of productivity. I don't know, in your piece.
Yeah.
That totally, I don't know. I can't wait to hear some of that music. Tell us a little bit more about the album and when we can expect to see it drop and all of that.
Yeah. Well, so right now I'm kind of at a bit of a crossroads with the album. Obviously, a lot of us musicians and creative people are having to make interesting decisions about whether or not to release music in this environment. And, you know, do we risk going into the studio? Are there other ways of making this music happen? For me, I sort of made a decision that although I have the option to kind of finish the recording of the album sort of in a remote virtual way, sort of looping back to giving more space and more of a voice to my band, I kind of decided that in order to complete it, I really needed to be sort of in the room, and I needed us to be collaborating, and I needed there to be this live energy, which right now is not totally possible, slash safe, if it is possible. For me personally, not safe. So right now I'm actually just actually kind of sitting with a lot of the music, and tweaking and still brainstorming on ways to improve it. But I've sort of decided not to record it until probably the spring. And yeah, it kind of took me a while to get there. I kind of go back and forth about it, and feel like, it's a really great time to release music into the world. It's a really important part of this time for a lot of people, is having art, and having something cathartic. And, I've seen a lot of great albums come out during this time. But for this project in particular, I've kind of decided that I'm going to kind of wait. So sort of pending, but in a way, I think it's actually great. I always appreciate the time to sort of fine-tune arrangements and, really sit on music, decide if changes need to be made. But yeah, I'm really excited for whenever we can reconvene, if you will.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Honoring the project and what it needs and what the songs need and what you want as an artist. There's such a fine balance, or there's a balance for juggling all of these things as a composer, as a singer, as an artist, also how you record, when you record, who you record with. I mean, I could keep going, but I won't.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's, just to highlight that, there's so many elements to creating an album. I think I'm actually coming up on, in a few weeks, sort of the anniversary of the end of my campaign for the album. I did a big Indiegogo fundraiser for it, which went super well. Was really exciting. But, there's so many steps. It takes so much time to kind of gather logistics for that kind of project. And for me, I mean, this is my first album, actually. So I'm prone to the overthinking of the first timer, the newbie, with such a large project.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about what that experience is like for you as an artist, as a composer. As, you said it's been 4 years that you've been working on this. Share a little bit about your inner experience walking this path.
Totally. Yeah. So I've recorded EPs before. So EPs are, shorter compilations, maybe 3 to 5 songs. And those are really popular right now. With the rise of, music streaming, Spotify, comes the rise of the singles and, the short attention span. Totally, totally get it. Totally there with everyone else. But it took me kind of a long time to decide to make an album, even though I have plenty of music already, just because I wanted it to really feel like a full project, something that, I didn't just kind of put all my songs into a bundle. I wanted it to be something that felt really natural and sort of a journey, if you will. I kind of nerd out a lot about listening to albums, from beginning to end, like in order. And I really sort of love that process. And I think it's a great way to get to know an artist. So yeah, a lot of these songs kind of came from my time in New York, and just a lot of sort of personal experiences. And I'm not sure what happened, but at a certain stage in my writing, I just kind of had a collection of songs that I felt really informed each other and really went together, and that I felt really strongly about, how they represented me musically. So yeah, that's when I decided to do the album. I have always been told by a lot of people that it's, important to really take your time with sort of releasing something like this, sort of like, your first statement of like, this is who I am. And I take that really seriously. And that's not to say that that's sort of the path for everybody. Everybody sort of has a different perspective on, why they're releasing music, how they're releasing music. But for me, I just wanted it to be something that was really cohesive and meaningful. And then the other part of it, because I like to make things complicated, is that I really wanted to have a visual element to the album. I think that a lot of the songs, for some reason, I just had sort of a visual idea that went along with them. Whether it was sort of like a storyline that you might see in a video, or, an image that could be painted, or movement that I sort of imagined, or colors, all of these things. Also a part of how I kind of knew that this was sort of something that went together, was that all of these songs sort of had that for me. So I kind of decided to go in sort of a different direction and have that element where I'll actually have visuals that accompany most of the music. So another reason that this is sort of a very drawn out process is because there's also logistics to making that happen. It's very complicated and expensive to just add visual art to 10 different songs. So
that's so
yeah, it's just a lot of logistical things. Even once the music is done, it's just a lot of planning, a lot of getting people together, a lot of like questioning things and scrapping them, and kind of like building a house. I know it's random, but you have a lot of people that are helping you build something, and they'll be like, oh, actually we can't do this way. Like you have to pick a different tile or something. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's sort of the background. And at this point, when the pandemic began, I was in the process of finalizing my production team and studio time and that kind of thing. So I guess that's where I'll be when I get back on horse.
Yay. Yes. Yeah. I'm hearing you talk about the various elements that go into, being an artist and putting things out there. And I think that some people who are not creative people might not really understand everything that goes into a composition, everything that goes into producing an album. There are so many different things to think about. Like you're saying, building a house. Building a house takes time. You make the decision, what type of materials are you going to use? Where are you going to put the house? What is the outside going to look like? What color paint? What sink are you going to?
Oh my gosh, so true. Yeah, album artwork, like whether you're going to release it online or print. If you release it online, where are you going to release it online? How are you going to market it? What songs you're going to include? Instrumentation, what musicians you're going to hire.
Yeah.
So many things, but it's fun. I'm lucky that I also I have a background in event planning, which is kind of another thing. And it's kind of just related to that process of like all the behind the scenes, all those small things that come together at the end. So I'm lucky that I actually really enjoy that kind of work. Cause I know a lot of musicians will be like, get me out of there. Just like, get someone else to do all this other stuff. But for me, I actually really enjoy all those different aspects of the planning of it.
I second that. I like figuring out how to package it in such a way that it will be fun for people to. It's fun to dream about how people will take in art.
Absolutely. Yes, yeah. I agree. And, something else that will be really interesting for this project for me is that a part of my planning process had to do with how will this project be performed? How will it be in a live setting? I didn't necessarily want to just perform it live with my band. I wanted there to be other elements of engagement. How do I transfer those visuals to a live setting? And of course, now that's going to be a completely different ballgame, a totally different question. How are people going to gather? When are people going to gather? And yeah, I think there's like room for creativity in that as well. I can definitely pivot and find new ways to present those ideas. Yeah, it's going to be interesting.
I want to give you a quick shout out here. You can find Raquel's music at raquelriveramusic.com. So please go there, check her out, see what she's up to, sign up for her mailing list. And I've been leading some music writing workshops, and I also have free resources up at creativemusicwriting.com. So if you're interested in exploring your own musical creativity, I hope you will join me over there. And so I taught a music writing workshop this past weekend, and someone asked, how do you incorporate music writing? How do I incorporate music writing into my life more? And, I have some thoughts about that, but curious to know what advice would you give first, Raquel?
I'm actually just going to mention your workshop because that's been great for me. So Casey does workshops where several people get together on Zoom, and a certain person will come up with a prompt or sort of an idea that we can write based off of. And then we all write for 30 to 45 minutes, which is great. The workshop has actually been really helpful for me because, sometimes it's hard to write on a daily or semi-daily basis if you don't necessarily feel inspired, and in a time like this where we're not really leaving our homes so much, how do you get excited, or how do you find ideas in the outside world? It's much harder. So that's been really helpful to kind of just have a time a day. I'm guilty. I'm not great at doing it every single day, but mostly every day, where you just kind of have a pre-selected theme and then just kind of go off of that. And it's been really exciting to just see not only what I come up with, but also what everyone else comes up with that's completely different. And, there's so many directions that we can all go with writing that's all very unique. So I think that having consistency actually really allows for a lot of other ideas to come out. Besides that, I kind of just sing to myself a lot, which, like I said, improvising is a big part of how I write. So allowing myself to do that, no matter what I'm doing, like washing the dishes, going for a walk, whatever, just kind of letting that flow. Sometimes those are the best ideas, and it doesn't necessarily have to even start from something. It's kind of just, this is what I'm feeling today.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. I did not ask you to give me a plug, by the way. Thank you so much.
She did not. She did not. That was purely like just the reality.
Yeah, I'm hearing you talk about the importance of accountability, really, of
Mm-hmm.
having something outside of yourself that provides some structure, that's also gives you room for community, not only accountability, but having a chance to hear what other people are doing. And so that the act of music writing maybe, I mean, I can't speak for you, maybe becomes bigger than yourself. You know, it's not just you sitting down, or at least that's why it works for me. It's helpful that it's not me sitting down by myself, and the act of other people being there. I know that I'm meeting people at a certain time helps motivate me to one, show up, get my butt in a chair, and start writing, and then also be inspired, like you were saying, by what other people are doing.
Absolutely. And, it can be so hard. It can be so hard to like put your butt in a chair, as you say. And, I think it gets harder as we sort of, become older. Not that we're old, but just, life happens, work happens, things happen. And it can be really hard. So I think part of what's great about that kind of setup is also not just accountability, but also feeling like, oh, this is like an important thing, like this is important enough for all of us to commit to regularly. And, part of that is also like, I'm not necessarily writing to put out a single, or I'm not necessarily writing for my album, or I'm not necessarily writing for a commission or anything like that. But it's important enough to just kind of keep doing it. And it is.
Yeah, it is. It is. I remember meeting a filmmaker in Los Angeles, and she was talking about protecting the creative flame. So, like you said, life happens. There's other things to do, other things that capture attention, and really holding that space and protecting the flame so that nothing puts it out.
That's such a good analogy. I love that.
Yeah, it stuck with me, and I think about that when things kind of start to creep in, as they do, and saying, okay, what are my priorities? Where do I want to spend my time? And it's yeah, living in balance. I can't remember where I read this last week. Hopefully somebody will tell me what book this is at some point. It's not about living in balance, because that doesn't exist. It's about living in harmony and trying to make things work. And living in harmony sometimes means, not spending as much time with the music, or maybe living in harmony means you're really spending a lot of time in this one piece because that's where you're at right now.
Yeah. I want to ask you kind of, you just made me have a thought about, how do you, I'm going to, turn the camera on you now. How do you feel about, a lot of artists or musicians, their life is, purely music. They dedicate a certain number of hours a day to writing or performing or practicing. To kind of turn your question about writing the other way, how do you sort of perceive the other things, the external things in, how you create or how you make music? Is it also something that we should be putting time into?
Oh, well, short answer to that is yes. I mean, the creators, musicians, I spend my time making music, but I also spend my time doing other things, you know? We're human beings, self-maintenance, taking care of yourself, being, you know, all musicians are entrepreneurs, and how do you make that work for yourself, living sustainably? I mean, these are all questions that we have and that many humans have. I mean, we're all trying to make it work, make it happen, live I'll say harmonious, balanced, well, no, throwing balance out there. Live life in a harmonic way. Yeah, that's the short version to that. How do you think about, well, I guess your question is, what about all the other stuff that isn't music?
Kind of broad, but I don't know. I personally think it's great to also, you know, take time to explore completely different things. And, you know, along the same lines of sort of putting a song down and coming back to it, you know, I have periods where I kind of put music down and come back to it. Obviously not completely because I'm too obsessed, but, you know, sometimes I have time when I just don't write, or sometimes I have times when I'm not really actively singing. And then coming back to it is sort of just slightly different than before. But something that I've been thinking about actually a lot, given the pandemic, is, you know, me personally, I don't think I've ever had this much time to sort of self-care or kind of go with my flow and follow my energy levels, you know, these kinds of things that we don't always have the time to do. And what I'm really curious about is to see how that affects, you know, not just creative people, but people in general. Like after this, will we have kind of learned how to sort of follow our intuitions a little bit more? And I'm just kind of curious to see how that transpires for music in general. And that's kind of a really broad like hypothesis or theory. But, you know, I think that like the way that we are living is fundamentally changing. And whether or not the situation itself is permanent, it'll be interesting to see how we approach our time differently, or how we approach creativity differently. And I think I don't know, I think I was reading a New York Times article about, you know, a similar concept. So totally not an original idea, but just been thinking a lot about that. And, you know.
Yeah. For anyone tuning in, this is Raquel Rivera, singer and composer. You can find her music at raquelriveramusic.com. And if you're looking to do some creative music writing, I have some free resources up at creativemusicwriting.com. Before we finish up for the day, Raquel, is there anything else that you would like to share with people who are watching?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much for tuning in and watching. And thank you, Casey, for hosting this. Casey does this every week. Is it every week?
Yeah, every Wednesday.
Different artists. Yes, different creators, different creative humans. Yeah, well, I just want to do, I guess, a little bit of a plug. My album is not coming out quite yet, but I will be having a podcast coming out in a few weeks, and that will be launched on my Patreon page, which I will link to the YouTube video. And it's actually sort of me rambling about my favorite songs, but in a way that sort of allows for deeper listening if you're not really a musician, or you lightly dabble in music, but you don't think about the themes or the concepts, and you want to kind of get to know sort of music listening a little bit better. That's a bit of what I talk about, and also share really fun music that I like. So I'll definitely link that for everybody. And I don't have an exact launch date, but in a few weeks, it'll be up on the internet.
Where can people go to find that information? Would that be on your website or on your Facebook?
Yeah. So right now I just have a mini blurb about it on my website, but the link will be on there as soon as I set a date for the launch. And it'll lead you to my Patreon. And if people don't know about Patreon, although it's kind of been a big thing during the pandemic, I think, but basically it's kind of like a membership to an artist that you love, and you kind of get monthly exclusive content from them, which is typically, art or, exclusive interviews, or, as I'm doing a podcast. So yeah, it's a really great platform to support artists you love. There's so many artists on there. So I'm sure that if there's someone you're listening to, chances are they're on there too. You can support them that way. It's a really good time to support artists.
Yeah.
Very good time to support artists.
Yeah.
Always a good time, but especially now.
And a quick shout out for you, Raquel. Graham Silverman is watching here, and he says, your fans are very excited to hear the album. I second that.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to share it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing your thoughts about composition, creativity, music, and life, all the stuff.
My pleasure.
Hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And I will be back next week with... stay tuned. Stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody.